What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Dad's All In Show. We are hoping to get through this tonight. I hope to provide you with some really good info, but I'm going to be straight with you that in the last few hours, our electricity has been flickering, and I've got all our kids on Wi Fi tonight, and they've got the day off of school tomorrow because here on the East Coast, we're in the middle of a blizzard. So I am hoping that you're going to be able to check this out, whether it be here live or on the replay, and we're able to get through all of this. We will see how it goes. So welcome. Thanks for joining me tonight. I want to tell you that because so many of you have reached out to me in the last few months and asked me to do some research and find you answers to certain things, I actually stumbled on some things that I'm going to share with you tonight. And I'm going to be honest, it's not the happiest stuff in the world. It's real evidence as to why our government isn't really making a priority the middle and low income families, specifically the working class families. And I'm going to show you evidence of that tonight. And some of this we've talked about a little before. It's like some of it dives into affordability and the things that are going up in price. But the majority of what I want to talk about actually has to do with cuts, either cuts that went through in the last year in 2025 or cuts that were proposed either at the federal or the state level, or in some cases, both. And I found a lot of information because I was doing research for you all on all the things that I've been working on the last few months, trying to find you answers. By the way, if you've got challenges you and your family are facing, I'm happy to try to find answers for you. All you got to do is hit me up in the comments here if you're on the replay, hit me up in the comments here in the live, or send me an email, dadsallинpodcast@gmail.com. So because I did all that research in the last few months and tried to find you all kinds of things, I started to gather evidence that was I really wasn't looking for. It just kind of started popping up as I was looking for other things. And I'm going to dive into all of that. But first, I want to remind you a couple things. Number one, if you're catching this on the replay, remember I'm going to put timestamps on it as long as you catch this probably by Monday afternoon. It'll go through processing and I can add in the timestamps to it. And I also want to remind you that we have a family assistance guide. So because all of you were asking for, are there assistance available? Is there assistance available out there for utilities, for rent, mortgage payments, for cash and cash assistance? How about food, childcare, even tax credits? And we will go back to this last week. I did a video, put out a video on tax credits you probably hadn't heard of, and we talked about it in the live last week too. So all of that is listed in the Family Assistance Guide. It's for free. It's down in the description. So just go ahead and grab onto that there, whether you're here in the live or even if you're on the replay. And it's also listed if you're catching this on the audio podcast. And I don't want to forget about my audio listeners. I appreciate you. I see you in the analytics out there. So wherever you want to catch this, I just appreciate you hanging out with me. So tonight, I do want to talk about some of the challenges that we face with a government that is not really making a priority our families. And as I said, this may not be the most, we'll say, uh, fun, happy, joyful kind of conversation, but I'm going to be straight with you today. I found some things that I found were kind of disturbing and a bit worrisome. And I want to be transparent and tell you that this is not coming from a political bias. I am pretty much a middle of the road dude. And so if you're thinking I'm leaning one way or another, that's not what this is about. I'm literally just about helping families, specifically helping kids. But I know that if I'm working with families or I'm working with educators, it trickles down to helping kids, which is one of my biggest passions in life. So I'm going to share with you a few things. As I said, I'm going to start with affordability, but I'm not going to touch on this too long. Tomorrow you can get the full video. So if you're listening this on Monday, it'll already be out. So the full video will go even a little bit deeper. But as what happens most of the time here, I will give you a sneak peek of what's coming down the pike in my next video. And that's what we're talking about tonight. So really what I was looking at was an opportunity for money to show me the way. In other words, you can find truth and strip away the bias, whether it be political bias or maybe it's religious bias, any kind of bias. So you're looking through a lens that's not cloudy and clouded. And what you can do is follow the money. And that's what I did. And before I get into all of that and looking at like the cuts and things of that nature, I do want to point out some things I've found about, specifically about the affordability of things. And now I will tell you this, like from a government standpoint, you don't have complete control over whether things are going to be affordable or not. Certain things can happen from, a government standpoint that can help families, but you don't have absolute control because some of it is dictated by economic things that are in play, like supply and demand and things of that nature. But I'm going to tell you the biggest concern, and this isn't just for the current administration, this goes back to the previous administration, is that there's not an eyes wide open mentality in that they can see that families are struggling. Or if they see it, they're not really acknowledging it. And I say that because how many times in the last year have the idea of price increases and inflation gone up, and I shouldn't just say the government officials in general have kind of turned a blind eye at it and said, no, that's not really true. Look at all these things that are going well. And this is not to say that there's some things that maybe are a little more affordable, but as a whole, what I found through my research, there's a ton of stuff that is hitting families very heavily. And so if you're catching this on the live or in the video version on YouTube and the replay, you can see I've got this graphic up here. And if you're on the podcast, I'm going to try to talk you through this so you can at least have an idea of what I'm talking about. On this graphic, you can see an overall increase in 2025 of about 3% in increase. That's like just an average. And it goes up in some areas, like motor vehicle insurance went up dramatically over the last 25 throughout 2025. And, some other areas, not as much. Gasoline, for example, and maybe it's gone down in some areas. Gasoline's tough because it fluctuates by where you live in the United States, and it's constantly in flux. But you can see overall, when you look down this list, whether it be food prices, medical care, housing, cars, also it's not listed on here, but like car work, car repairs. We talked about this a few weeks back. That's all gone up in price. Electricity, utilities. There's a ton of stuff that just has gone up in price. And you might look at that and say, well, it's just 3%. That's the average. Now, what I want to point out is this. When we talk about affordability, you're getting hit by multiple areas. So I'll paint a picture for you. If you are a family living paycheck to paycheck, which so many families are, you are struggling because you've noticed an increase in your groceries. You've noticed an increase in your motor vehicle insurance. You've noticed an increase in maybe your utilities and your rent, like all these areas. And then what happens? Something out of the ordinary hits you, and maybe you're staying afloat, but barely because you're going paycheck to paycheck, but you get hit with your car breaks down, for example. Well, then you're in scramble mode. And now, because those costs have gone up, if you're just going along, just paycheck to paycheck, scraping through because of all the higher costs, and that's essentially what you're trying to do right now and manage your way, when something out of the ordinary hits you, it can hit you like a ton of bricks. And now you're forced to go into debt or worse. And if you go into debt, now there's another monthly fee. You got to find a way to come up with that money. So affordability is absolutely an issue. Whether any government officials will tell you or not, I want you to know it's legit. It is absolutely legit, and families deserve better. Families deserve People who are going to identify the fact that we as families are not having it easy. I've said this before. This is one of the most difficult decades in history to be a parent, certainly in modern history. Yet sometimes it feels like families are put on the back burner. There are a lot of other things that get the focus, and it's not families, even though being a parent's hard, even though being a parent's expensive, and everything is going up, which means it's more expensive. One of the things that wasn't on that list was the cost of, I should say, college, but also post secondary training, because it could also be maybe something in the trades, any kind of training and schooling beyond high school. All those things have gone up in cost. So although we're focusing mostly on like the your child that's a newborn or toddler all the way up to 12th grade, listen, if you've got kids who are you're trying to fund and help them in the next stage of their lives, that's expensive too. So if you're watching here on YouTube, you can see this image on the screen. And what I've done was I did a deep dive in the last few months. I wasn't planning on doing this, and just because I was doing so much digging and trying to find answers for you all, some of these things kept popping up, and I just kept making notes of things and tucking it away. And eventually I got to the point where I think I got to put this out there and share this. So what I did was I made notes of, in 2025, some of the budget cuts that were happening in the federal government, and also in some cases in the state level, and some of the proposed cuts. And you might say, well, it's proposed, but it didn't really happen. Well, let me say, if it's proposed, that's the intent. Whether it goes through or not, that is telling you something. They're telling you, if they're proposing a cut that has to do with helping families, that's a slap in the face too, because you're not a priority. Your family is not a priority, which is hurtful and disappointing and all the other adjectives you want to throw out at it. So I'm going to share with you some of these findings that I had, and I'm going to start right here with social programs. So social programs I've been going over, and again, you can find it in the financial assistance guide, ways to find extra funding and support for your family. So check that out. I've been doing deep dives, and it's a live document, by the way, so I keep adding to it, and you'll get constantly updated. You won't have to keep coming back and downloading it. It's a PDF booklet. It will just constantly update itself. And a lot of the things that are listed here on the screen, we have talked about, and I've provided you with some creative ways to go about getting assistance. But for example, SNAP funding, has to do with food, right? Not listed under SNAP funding, but also listed on this board is WIC funding. So those two programs are enormously important to families. And I don't really need to go into exactly why. I think you all know, if you're receiving SNAP services, you need financial support to get food for your family. If you're receiving WIC services, then you need support for your maybe unborn child, because it can be for mothers who are pregnant, or your young child or children up to, I believe it's the age of 5. And it allows you to buy certain food items. So although those are two separate programs, they kind of work hand in hand. There have been so many people who want to either cut SNAP and WIC or find extra ways to make those hurdles to get those fundings even more difficult. And so when we talk about cuts, it's not just the cuts. Sometimes it's the restrictions that make it more challenging. And don't get me wrong, will there always be people who take advantage of things? Yes, they absolutely will. But my opinion is that the vast majority of families who need this they're not taking advantage of it. They need it. And again, the reason I do all this work, yes, it's for you to help families, but I'm mainly thinking about your kids. I want your kids to have the best chance to have the best life possible and succeed and become the best whatever it is that they want to be in life. And I know that that happens is more likely to happen if they live in a house where they are well fed, where there is shelter, which again is something that's on this list. There are plenty of government officials who would desperately love to work on cutting back and have attempted to create deep cuts on Section 8 housing. That would be a voucher system, which is already ridiculously hard to get into. There's a wait list that people will tell you takes forever to get involved. So there's already hurdles beyond hurdles to get to that kind of assistance, but they're still cutting away at it. Utilities. We've talked about LAHEAP in the past and what an amazing opportunity that is to get 12 months of assistance for your family with your utilities and energy. So when I say energy, it could be propane, heat, could be any source that's going to allow you to heat your house, and then utilities wise, heating, air conditioning, all of that. Well, there's been plenty who have wanted to not just cut LAHEAP, but eliminate the program altogether. You talk about disappointing. That one's ultra disappointing. And here's another one. The General Welfare Program is TANF, and that is constantly under a microscope because a lot of people believe that individuals are using and misusing that program, but they are and have been for quite some time attempting to cut away at that program. That's probably not anything new for you. You're probably well aware of that, but here's one that you probably didn't know about. Child care assistance. There have been far too many attempts in the last year to cut down on what is available for child care assistance. So it's not an expansive list. There's far more than that. But there, as far as like social programs, there's some to just kind of paint a picture for you. Like you can say families are a priority, but the proof is in the pudding. The old saying is put your money where your mouth is. Right now, that's not happening. They're not putting their money where their mouth is. They're saying, oh, we support families. We know it's tough out there. But you know what? They are electing to try to put their money elsewhere into other things instead of programs that are going to help you. Now, we're not just getting into low income stuff. We are diving into a variety of other areas. And the next one up is education. We learned from the jump in January 2025 that education and support services in education was going to be on the chopping block because right off the bat, there was a declaration they were going to take down the Department of Education, which still stands today, but barely by a thread. There's hardly any, at least at the federal level, who are left. And you might ask, well, really, and you'll hear this often, what does the Department of Education actually do? You know what they do? They help to fund the most vulnerable populations. They help to fund programs for students who need extra help. It's pretty important. Now, when you break down funding for a school district, I'm not going to deep dive on this for you, but I'll let you know a portion of that comes from the federal government, goes to the state, specifically earmarked for programs that will help. We call them Title I schools. Those are schools that have a certain percentage of disadvantaged families within their school. And along that lines, they have attempted to really cut into the available funding. And that would mean getting rid of or cutting back on before school programs, after school programs, summer programs, pre-K programs. And it can actually bleed into other portions too, because it's not just Title I funding, but that's kind of the mainstay of Title I funding. It is designed to help the most vulnerable populations, your students who come from low income families, or also students who need extra help. Like that's the focus. And so cutting that away really means that the kids who need the most extra help, kids who need the most extra support, whether it be extra focus on academics or other areas as well, or maybe it's school nutrition, right? So there has been a cutback on SNAP, which works in unison with school systems, and there's been cuts into that program. There has been cuts on the other end for academic enrichment, so not just our students who are struggling, but now we're also talking about our high achieving students and extra programs that take them further. And here's one that's really heartbreaking: homeless youth support. In other words, there's a program called McKinney-Vento, which focuses on homeless kids who are homeless. And this probably isn't exactly what you think. The majority of people, when you hear the word homeless, you think of somebody on the streets. Yes, that absolutely is the case. You know where the majority of homeless people live? With their families live temporarily with others. Some of them in shelters, many of them with friends, with family, and the hope until they can get themselves up and running and get a footing. So there are a lot of kids who fall into that category. The funding for those programs on the chopping block, family engagement, what schools use to try to get families to come in and stay and get involved, all those programs that schools will try to do, those are on the chopping block. But education isn't just pre-K to 12th grade. It's also, as I said earlier, involves with your college kids. So if you've got college kids, the cuts into grants, the cuts into student loans, child care programs for if you are a college student who is a parent, a lot of schools will have assistance available so that you can send your child to some maybe a pre-K or child care program while you are taking classes for no fee or at least a reduction in fees, those kinds of things. Yeah, those are definitely have been on the chopping block. And so have student support services, extra services, whether it be mental health related services or kids with disabilities at the secondary, at the college, the higher ed level, all of those things in education. So it's not just pre-K to 12th grade, it's also our college level kids too. The next category I would say that you'll see a lot of cuts and restrictions, extra layers of restrictions, is civil rights. First thing that probably is jumping in our minds as we talk about civil rights currently is what's happening with ICE and immigrant families and the challenges that they face. That is a huge piece. However, I'm, for this discussion, only focusing on where the money's going. And right now, as you well aware, ICE is that program is funded extremely well. I'll tell you what's not, and what's getting cut and what's getting restricted is programs for individuals with disabilities, whether it be at the adult level or even in school, kind of partnering up with that, what we talk about with education. Here's an example. There were so many states who wanted to fully get rid of and dismantle 504 plans. If you've been a long time listener, you know I'm a big advocate of 504 plans, not just because of all my years in education and supporting students, but because 3 of my kids have either previously or are currently on 504 plans. And that's a plan that allows kids to get accommodations. For example, my son, when he was in school, he had to have access to a nurse because he had type 1 diabetes. He needed to be able to go, and if he had a low blood sugar, he needed to treat it. If he had a high blood sugar, he needed to give himself an injection of insulin. That's part of the process, right? So he needed that access to a nurse whenever it was requested. That's written in a 504 plan for a reason. It's so that everybody knows, hey, here's the game plan of what this child needs. Yeah, there were a lot of states that fully attempted to just whack 504 plans and get rid of them. Sad stuff. Some other areas in civil rights would be programs for mental health. Is this really what we want? We want our kids who might be struggling with mental health challenges, or adults, meaning the parents who are struggling with mental health challenges, not have access to counseling, to services. That's a recipe for disaster, in my opinion. And then we get into DEI, which most people, when they hear DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, they immediately think that has to do with hiring. You know, that is such a small sliver of that. It's such a small sliver. But because it was a hot topic in the last 3 years, it kind of blew up, and that's all anybody thinks about. But within that is all these programs for individuals that help them be more inclusive and live more inclusive lifestyles, or programs to support more diversity within communities or within schools, all of it. So the list goes on, but civil rights is an area that has been dramatically on the chopping block as well. So then I got to this part, and this may be the most intriguing for you. I touched on this a few weeks back, but I'm going to tell you a little bit more. So the budget office, the Congressional Budget Office, put out this is straight from their site, and they put out information about projections for revenue and tax for coming years. And what you're seeing here on the screen shows you that the lowest and middle income families are projected to get the least help in coming years. They're going to get the least support and breaks. However, take a look down there at the eighth level, the ninth level, and the highest income level. Those people who are very wealthy are getting huge breaks. I'm going to give you this in a different chart put out by, again, this is basically the same, it's the Congressional Budget Office, but this was put out by the staff of the Joint Committee back in August. And you can see by this graph, just take a look at that. Like, this is the same data, it's just looking at it from a different standpoint. Working Americans are going to see all those resources shrink in coming years. Your low to middle class families, your working class families are going to get less help. Your upper class, your wealthy, are going to get so much more. How ridiculous is that? Especially when you consider that families are struggling, that families are trying to make ends meet, I guess. Like, they're trying to do the best they can, but it's a struggle. All of that is ultra disappointing. And I say that as a father, but I also say that as somebody who tries to be as empathetic as possible for those who are in need. And there is no doubt between affordability and also the amount of support that is cut into all these programs. I don't even think we touched on medical, like the medical costs that are going up, and the cuts to different medical programs. Like, healthcare is a mess. And all of that is just disappointing. So I don't usually like to be somebody who's like, oh, this is, I usually like to give you something, one, that helps you feel better, and two, is actionable. And this information, this research is troubling. but I will give you an action item. You might say, well, there's really nothing I can do about this. To an extent, maybe not. However, this is what I would suggest. And I've seen this in play, and I'll share an example of this in a minute. Reach out to legislators, your local, your state, your federal representatives, your senators. Reach out to them and let them know, I see that families are getting scalped and the wealthy are getting well beyond their fair share of breaks. And ask them why. And ask them why they're not doing more. And it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or you're a Republican or you're an independent. It is obvious. It is absolutely obvious that families are getting scalped. Cuts to programs, restrictions in programs, affordability of things that you need, as simple as groceries and utilities and rent and housing costs and medical costs all going up. I showed it to you, showed you all the proof. It's disappointing. So reach out and let them know, because yes, that is really what we have to fall on. I'll give you an example. As soon as I got a hold of the information that the Department of Education was going to be on the chopping block way back in January 2025, I immediately reached out to people. And I did, if you happen to follow me on TikTok, I was doing a video, like, I don't know, every couple days about that particular topic. And I got a lot of pushback, and I had a lot of people who yelled at me and said that I didn't know anything about what I was talking about. I was looking at it at that point from the effects of as I said before, Title I programming, but also what we would call IDEA funding, which we didn't talk about, but individuals, kids with disabilities, that is all within the Department of Education. And I laid it all out there, and I had plenty of people on TikTok who told me I was, didn't know anything about what I was talking about. Turns out I kind of did. And because I had, just like this, I'd done my research. I'd found out a little bit of information about it. And did I know everything? No. But what I did was I reached out to my legislators, and I tried to find out, what are you doing? What are you doing to help? This is not right, because they're supposed to be there to be the voice for their people. And let's hope that they are. I appreciate you hanging out with me. I hope you've been able to hear this on podcast, watch it and listen on the live show or on the replay, because I don't know what the Wi-Fi's been on, but so far, knock on wood, I do have electricity despite this blizzard that we're in. So I am going to get rolling. I want to remind you, we'll do it again next week, 9 p.m. Eastern. As we move in in a couple weeks, I do have a guest coming in, so kind of keep that in the back of your mind. But I also want to remind you, shoot me an email, throw something in the comments. What can I help you with? This is my specialty area, finding resources for educators, but also finding resources for families. And that's what I want to do. So let me know, and I will go hunting. And in the meantime, check out the video which goes deeper on the topic of what we talked about tonight. It will be available Monday morning, tomorrow morning if you're on the live. And let me know what you think. dadsallin podcast@gmail.com. Shoot me an email. Have a great week, everybody. Appreciate you out there. Remember, parenting is no joke, but your kids are better for you doing the best that you can. Keep that in mind. They know it's not easy. They see it in your eyes. They see it in our eyes. But you just keep on keeping on. We'll get there eventually. Have a great one.